Those are the three main arguments, so let's look at them individually. Let's start off with this idea of earthquakes. Some other points in the 2NC and the 1NR included Pohang, South Korea, reviews for induced seismicity, NEPA reviews case-specific. They talked about how it's not linked to restrictions on all these different monitoring things. They said environment versus earthquakes. Basically, any earthquake argument, you can cross-apply to three responses. The first one is reduces earthquakes in the US. Again, reduces earthquakes in the US. This is really simple. There's two examples of historical precedent related to geothermal energy in this round. One says that under the regulations in South Korea, geothermal caused an earthquake. The other says that under the regulations in the United States, geothermal reduced the amount of earthquakes. Fortunately for the affirmative team, we're reforming the process in the United States, not in South Korea. So we're actually expanding a form of energy that in our country has reduced earthquakes. So the impact is of an affirmative argument. Again, an affirmative argument. If you want a form of energy that reduces earthquakes and has been proven to do so in the United States, then you should be voting for the affirmative team, because we expand the very energy that does that. But the second response is of a safer review process. Again, a safer review process. Even if you agree with the negative team that geothermal energy does cause earthquakes, then you should still be voting for the affirmative team. Why? Because given that fact, we make categorical exclusions apply to geothermal energy. Now, as they agreed to in cross-examination, earthquakes are a high-risk activity, but categorical exclusions, unlike the NEPA review process, focus more agency manpower and more resources on the high-risk parts of a project, meaning that we'll be making sure the risk of earthquakes are taken care of to a greater extent than we would have if you didn't have the affirmative team's plan. But the third response is of not changing monitors. Again, not changing monitors. They talked about oftentimes how under the National Environmental Policy Act, we monitor earthquakes afterwards. We're not changing that. We're just changing the review process to get a project started in the first place. The next major argument, aside from earthquakes, that they talked about was the idea that there's been like this amendment of the National Environmental Policy Act, and because of that, the 7 to 10 years average doesn't apply. My first response is of up to 2 years. Again, up to 2 years. Now, they said that these amendments are changing how long it takes for geothermal energy to be approved, because now each review is up to 2 years. Well, let's read the piece of evidence I read from 2021. It says, quote, that means that a single geothermal location could potentially trigger up to 6 separate NEPA reviews, whose median review timelines range from a few months to 2 years, end quote. Meaning, even before these new regulations, the average was 7 to 10 years because you had 6 different reviews that were up to 2 years. Regardless of whether or not it's legislated now, before and after these amendments, each review took up to 2 years, and when we did 6 to them, on average it came to 7 to 10 years. But even if this wasn't the case, my second response is the NEPA timeframe. Again, the NEPA timeframe. This wasn't saying that this is an average of the projects that's gone on. You can look at the evidence. It's a chart listing out 7 different regulations, saying, here's how long we predict this regulation to take. Then, we predict this regulation to take this long, and so on and so forth. The predicted time frame based on that is 7 to 10 years. I encourage you to look at the evidence after the round. Their next major argument was talking about how we have to prove that assessments are waiting. My response is no assessments because of regulations. Again, no assessments because of regulations. Why do you think there aren't any geothermal assessments? It's because a company doesn't want to spend 7 to 10 years to get a project started, and thus are not going to file for an assessment. But even if that wasn't the case, my second response is 58 developing projects. Again, 58 developing projects. Regardless of this government website statistic, keep in mind government websites take a long time to update either way. We have evidence saying that there are currently 58 developing geothermal projects. Geothermal is being considered. Then they had a couple of smaller arguments they talked about. They said in comparable numbers, my response is 16% of grid. Again, 16% of grid. What we're saying here is that we can supply 65 million homes, which is 16% of the entire United States national grid. Now, 1% of the grid is an incredible amount of energy. 16% of the grid supplied by geothermal diversifies our energy sector well, and we should be advocating for this good form of energy. They also talked about how there can be a bunch of different types of delays, and that was the last point they brought up in the 1NR. My response is not about geothermal. Again, not about geothermal. This piece of evidence never mentioned geothermal. Keep in mind, there are other energy forms, such as oil and such as gas, that have categorical exclusions. At the end of the day, it has been unresponded to that geothermal is cheap, geothermal is secure, and geothermal is a good daily cycle. For these reasons, vote affirmative.